Okay, here we are. This is Jay Brown Yoga Talks podcast. My name is Jay Brown. Welcome to new people, and thanks to everyone else for being here. How's it going? You doing all right? Me? I'm okay. Honestly, I'm having a bit of a battle within myself right now. I had a plan to come in today with some counter energy. I didn't want to once again give in to the dismay as much as I did last week if you were here. And I really wanted to see if I could bring with me in this intro some inspiration, some, sense of camaraderie. And I think that I'm only going to be able to partially fulfill that plan. Like the latter part, the camaraderie, I am able to summon, but only in the dismay because the last 48 hours has unfolded in a way that it makes it impossible for me to just try to look past the immediate psychosocial, physical realities that I'm facing. Of course, there's always a metaphysical reality in which I'm totally fine. But there's all other kinds of experiences that I am having that are fundamentally connected to that and have to be sorted through. And just now, before I hit record, I was looking for a little inspiration, so I decided to read some emails that I got this week from podcast listeners. And this is the first email I came across. It says, "Hi Jay, this is Masha from Berlin, Germany. I've been listening to your podcast for over 2 years now, and it's become a weekly ritual for me. I have written many emails to you in my head, but never sent them. Somehow today seems like the right day to do it. We're in week 4 of the second lockdown over here, and things are starting to feel difficult. There's a lack of hope settling in, and a growing pain over the separation and loss of community. I do online yoga every morning to get out of bed, and this morning the teacher started with a meditation on coming into power by meditating on abundance in your life, trying to make the point that we already have everything we need inside of us. While in other times I've been able to do that, this morning I just slipped into cynicism and ended up crying on my mat. Then I listened to your podcast while having breakfast, and you told the story of crying to the Beastie Boys, and your honesty and willingness to share your sadness and hopelessness made me feel so much more connected than any meditation on abundance could. I really appreciate your rawness and honesty and your ability to call out bullshit. I come from the goth punk leftist scene myself and spent a lot of time doing queer and social justice activism, and the language of the love and light yoga scene often seems like a lie to me, and I think about it a lot, how the language especially can be very exclusive and potentially gatekeeping for many people who are not white, upper middle class, and straight. It makes me happy that someone like you occupies a respected position in the yoga world, and I recognize all the work that you're doing to make yoga more accessible. As a queer, non-binary trauma and violence survivor, accessibility is so important for my own practice. Then goes on to tell me to check out the Trans Yoga Project, which I definitely will, and points out to me that I misgendered my friend Ryan on the show, and we talked about gender, and I know about that, and I'm sorry, there was just no way to go back and re-record the intros and outros. Thank you so much for your hard work and honesty. It gives me hope. All the best, Masha. Well, Masha, thank you for sending me this note. In whatever way that you felt connected from hearing me vent my stuff last week, I felt that getting this email back from you. And I agree with you. That's why I'm not able to like manufacture some kind of light and love talk today. Like the only way I'm able to find my way to the light and the love is sort of like through the shit. like the light and love can only be arrived at in an authentic and real way when I am able to heal through the suffering or whatever. And frankly, like the last 24 hours have not been great for me, my friends. They have not been great at all. It started last night when I was flossing my teeth and the crown on my other side popped off. And if you've been around, you heard me talking a few months ago, I got some dental work done, had to have a tooth pulled and a bridge made. Well, I have to get the other side done too. There's two teeth that I had crowned in my early 20s from that crappy-ass dentist who I think did a shitty job, and then 30 years later, it's coming home to roost. And I knew that I had to get both sides done. And I socked the money away because I realized that I had to get these teeth done, and I knew how much it was going to cost. I had already priced it out with the dentist. So I socked the money away to get both teeth done. And a couple months ago, I did one side. But then, the last time we had a really big storm here in Pennsylvania, the roof on the side porch was leaking worse than it ever had. One of the slate tiles slipped out in the front, and I had like a squirrel coming back in the attic again. And so we had to get those roof repairs done. And I used the money from my other tooth to fix the roof. So last night, when my crown popped off, I realized, oh shit, I don't have the money to get that fixed. And then, here's how life is. Then, while I was like awkwardly, I think, straining my body to look in the mirror to get the crown back on, which I was having difficulty with, my back tweaked out. And not like that little, like that tweak where like I woke up with it this morning and I'm like, fucked, like my back's fucked up again. Like, how did that happen? I've been taking great care of my body. I haven't been having a lot of problems. Like there was a few little flare-ups, if you remember, but in general, my back's been fine, especially the last couple of weeks. Everything's been great. Been doing my squats. I've been doing everything right. And then all of a sudden, while I'm straining to get this crown back on, my back tweaks out. I managed to get the crown back in using a little bit of that temporary crown stuff you can get at the CVS. And I'm sitting here, my back's hurting, and I'm thinking, okay, was it that I was straining to look in the mirror that set that off? Or is it that I don't have the money to fix the tooth? And that's actually a conversation I'm going to be having over the next couple weeks if you stick around for that. But it's even deeper. One of the main reasons I've been able to feel okay as I have over the last 8 months is because I received financial assistance. And that financial assistance was given to us with the idea that by now things would be back to some more semblance of normal. But they haven't. So the assistance is run out. There isn't anything on the table about any more assistance coming. And things are not at all back to normal. In fact, as Masha was saying, the same is true here, where I am. All the case rates are up, and it looks like they're going to be putting some new restrictions in place. And that makes me feel frightened. It makes me feel profoundly frightened. If you're not feeling the dismay of this moment, there's something wrong with you. And I should say one other thing, because my friend Richard sent me an email this week too. Shout out to you, Richard. He was a little, I guess, concerned or maybe upset that last week I was talking about the pandemic, and he felt that in expressing my confusion and my skepticism, I downplayed the severity or impact of COVID and the pandemic, and I made it seem like it was no big deal. I certainly did not intend to do that. Clearly, this is impacting us, all of us. And the thing that Richard was upset about is I referenced this article that a bunch of the parents around here had read, and in the article they talked about having some people over, and then people got COVID, and I suggested that, all the people at that party who got it ended up being okay. And Richard has friends who contracted it and are not okay. They didn't die, but they're still having complications, and there's a lot of people who that's happening for. And I just want to say that nobody in my pod is having people over. Like, we're not having 10 people over like in that article. We've been very conscientious about what we have done as a family on a personal level to take responsibility and play our role in this situation that's affecting all of us. I still, though, have the same confusion and the same skepticism, frankly. Over the last few months, whenever I've talked to people who know more than me about epidemiology or doctors or people who work in public health, they all say the same thing to me. They say you have to listen to the public health professionals, you have to listen to the scientists, and you have to go by the data. And as the data comes in, we'll know more. And it's evolving, remember? So when I do that, when I look at the data that is being presented, and I see that, for every person that Richard or me or any of us know who have died or who are experiencing complications from this, there are like 10 other people who that's not the case for. And let me be very clear. I am staying home. I am wearing a mask when I go out. I don't want to be irresponsible. I want to be thoughtful and considerate of everyone else around me. But I catch myself in these moments, it doesn't make sense. Like, I'll be at my studio and there's nobody in the building. And I put my mask on to go to the bathroom because that's what we're supposed to do. So it's like late at night, it's like the middle of the night, nobody's there but me, and I'm wearing a mask because I'm protecting other people who aren't there, or I'm protecting myself from people who are not there. Like, I find myself behaving in these ways because I want to follow the rules. But we have to acknowledge that doesn't make sense. It's like, on the one side, we're being told that we need to look at science and data. And on the other hand, we get anecdotes of people who are suffering, and it rips into our hearts. And trying to hold both of those things, I'm feeling completely overwhelmed, if you can tell. And the only way, as I was saying, to find my way to the metaphysical underlying reality of my own okayness is to sort through all of this other stuff that's happening to me, all these questions in my mind. So, there you go. I just did it again. I just dumped it all out like that. But in a way, that, for me, is a process of practice. It's like, okay, this is everything that's going on with me. I just said it as clearly as I can say it. And now I will see where I can go from here. And a lot of that is connecting to you all, just like reading the email from Masha, and just like today's episode with Adam Schwartz. Adam was a New York yoga teacher. He has since moved. You'll hear we met once a year and a half or 2 years ago when I did a live podcast from Brooklyn. Adam came, and that was the only time I met him. Adam was a teacher at Yoga to the People in New York City. Yoga to the People had a very prominent presence in the New York yoga scene. And some of you probably know a lot of stuff got revealed. Some while back, an anonymous Instagram account started publishing anonymous stories from people who practice there and train there. And as I said last week, I've been really wanting to sort out what was going on before this pandemic happened so that we can make some clear-headed choices about what we're doing going forward. And Adam and I had a conversation about what was happening at Yoga to the People. And just in general, like what we are facing as yoga teachers in this moment. So it felt good to connect with Adam. I'm glad that you're going to get to hear it today. Real quick before we do, let me mention that this episode is brought to you in support by Podcast Premium subscribers, people like Rebecca Anderson and Anna Marie Webb. Thank you, Rebecca and Anna. We're very grateful to you and to all of our Podcast Premium subscribers. If you listen to this show and you want to see it keep going, really, I mean, if you want to show some support, then becoming a Podcast Premium subscriber is the way to do that. Not to mention, you also, in doing so, will get full access to the archives of this show. It is Choose Your Rate, and if you wanted to listen to some of those older episodes and you are experiencing financial hardship, please just email us and we will totally give you a free account. But if you can afford to contribute, it makes a huge difference. And again, we are very grateful. To learn more about becoming a Podcast Premium subscriber and find all the other ways to connect with me, whether it's through my live stream classes or the weekly teacher's call or the on-demand videos or just sending me emails, everything can be found at jbrownyoga.com. All right, I think that's fine. I think I have vented enough for now. I will touch base with you on the other side, and I will tell you who's coming on next week, which I haven't been doing much these days, but I am going to today. We have a special guest coming next week, and if you want to know who that is, you can check in with me on the other side. For now, let's go ahead and get to this conversation that I had with Adam Schwartz. Hello?
There you go.
All right. Sorry about that. Take two.
Okay. I can hear you better now too. Your volume was a little low before.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm glad we're catching each other again. I was juggling a few things right before we jumped on, and there was like an important technical thing that I needed to fix. So, take two. Hello, Adam. How are you?
I'm doing okay. We had an interesting week.
Yeah.
It turned out I taught a class. Now I'm down in Asbury Park in New Jersey because I moved because of the pandemic.
Right. And where were you? I'm sorry, were you in the city or were you in Brooklyn before you moved?
I was in the city. I was in the East Village.
Right.
And I was living there for since 2008 or so.
I see. And then you moved. When did you split town with the pandemic? When did you do that?
Yeah, I split town around March we got out, but we still had the lease there. So we finished our lease, and our lease was up in June, and then the lease was up, and it didn't seem to make much sense to come back to New York in June. So we were like, what if we lived by the beach and paid less rent?
How about that?
So now we got 2 more now we were living in a 1-bedroom, and now we're living in a 3-bedroom by the beach and paying like $500 less rent.
But isn't that interesting? Because
We're like,
well, there was a reason why we were staying in Brooklyn and New York, even though it cost so much for so many years, because we felt like our work was tied there, right? Or all of our connections were there. But the pandemic sort of severed a lot of that.
yeah. And then just so many studios closed. It was like, well, what work am I going to be able to get there anyway? And
Right.
then it was also sort of an issue where it was like I'd even before the pandemic, I was thinking, what if we had more space, and what if I like led like a slower lifestyle? And it's kind of like, and I've already been hired by like a couple of studios down here, which leads me to this story about this week. So
there's studios open right now?
Yeah, there's studios open here, but there's different restrictions at different studios. And one studio I was teaching at, they like only one student came to the class, and it turned out she was one of the teachers that teaches there. And and the students she taught that morning had COVID. So then she tested positive for COVID. So then I took a test, which I found out yesterday came back negative. So there was a couple days where I was very concerned if I had it or not, even though I wasn't feeling anything.
Wow. Do you have like easy access to testing there?
Yeah, and it was actually really easy. I just like rode my bike up to the Walgreens on Main Street and swabbed my nose, put it in the bag, and sure enough.
Wow. See? Yeah. What a trip. So tell me that again, a woman at the center who was in your class? Why did she come to class if she had somebody who tested positive in her class?
Because she didn't know.
Oh.
And none of them knew until the day after, so they told all of us. And it was like,
See, I guess like right now, there had really been this feeling here in Pennsylvania that everything was sort of leveling out, especially in my county. We hadn't had any deaths for like weeks, and like we were kind of in a good place. And then there's this recent uptick of cases, and there starts to be an upswing, and you can feel the tension rising. I know that the high school right here decided to close down for the rest of the week because they had a case. So everybody seems to a little bit now that the election will sort of pass, not really, but we're returning our energies back to what's happening with the pandemic, and there's still kind of a high degree of alert right now.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there's still a high degree of alert here, but I still think people are still open to the idea of taking a class, but they definitely minimize the capacity for sure, but it's still a little tricky, and it's still, people aren't quite 6 feet apart, even though they're supposed to be. So it's tough, but at the same time,
Oh gosh. Well, did you do any online classes? Because a lot of people just jumped online.
I did do some online classes, and one of the studios I was teaching at in the city did some online classes, but for whatever reason, it didn't really, that wasn't the best situation. That particular studio wasn't like doing the best to promote it. So those classes were like not really worth it financially.
Right.
So I had to find a different route.
Oh man, I know how that goes. Geez Louise, what a time we're living through, my friend. Last time I saw you was in Brooklyn. We met once, right? You came to that live recording I did in Brooklyn.
Yeah, that was really nice. I really enjoyed that. It was so nice to have so many like knowledgeable people about yoga in the same room, and to be able to listen what you guys said. I know I didn't like talk too much that day, but it was so nice just to like be on a fly on the wall with like Amy Matthews and Leslie Kamenov and Sam Chase and all them.
I know. And it was a very small, intimate group too. So it had a very depth feel to it, you know?
Totally.
Oh, very cool. Well, I'm glad for us to connect. And, you know, it is interesting because you just mentioned Amy and Sam. And, you know, I know they work together at Yoga to the People. And, you know, I can't remember. My mind with time right now is all pretty mixed up. But I did remember coming across like somebody. I get emails from people when they think there's things that that are going to be relevant to the yoga world, which I really appreciate that the podcast has a reputation for that. So if people see something that they think is like an important thing that people should know about, they'll email me about it. And somebody pointed me to that Instagram account that was like uncovering abuses at Yoga to the People.
Yeah.
And was that after the pandemic or before the pandemic? I can't even remember. It was during the pandemic, right?
It was, I don't remember the exact date or whatever, but I remember of how I learned about it was I was still living with my dad in that couple months where I was on my lease. I think it was right around late June or early July. And the person who told me about it was also someone who'd left Yoga to the People a few years earlier. And she used to be very heavily involved there. She was a manager there. And she told me about it. And I started looking at it. And I started looking at that page. And they really, right at that time, it was a very, they were posting like 8 or 10 things a day, and just like it seemed like everyone who used to work there just was starting to tell their personal story on their own Instagram as well. But I think what really gave it a lot of power was that initially it was anonymous. And I think a lot of people, like even after we quit or stopped working at Yoga to the People for whatever reason, there's still like a level of like fear there, because part of the way they operated was out of a level of keeping their employees in like a fearful state a bit.
So wild. You know, I remember, I mean, for anybody, I should fill people in who are listening to this because they might not know what Yoga to the People is or might not know about this. And, you know, Yoga to the People, I remember when the first Yoga to the People opened on St. Mark's Place.
Yep.
And it was sort of the first center that did an all by donation model. So it was all just pay whatever you want. And I remember the classes would be huge, and it was a lot of like a college kids because NYU was right there. And I just remember then later when I opened my place, I had a spot in Brooklyn. You came to this location when we recorded in 2007, and Yoga to the People opened another spot down the way in Williamsburg, not too long after me, I don't think.
Yeah, it was right around then was, I think, when Brooklyn opened. Because I remember before Brooklyn existed, the Yoga to the People in Brooklyn existed too. And I actually taught there quite a bit. That's probably the location I taught the most at.
Okay. Well, see, what I always remember thinking was, how is it possible that guy has these yoga centers on a by donation model? Like, because I was a yoga center owner and I had a lease in Williamsburg. And I was like, how does he get these leases? Or does he have some other way to finance? Like, I was always wondering about that.
Yeah.
And what were you going to say?
Oh, no. I don't know how he did that, but the finances there were always very, very secretive. And the picking up your envelope of money as your paycheck or, you know, every month was always quite inconvenient. And you'd get like, you know, whatever you were owed in like a giant stack of like $5 and $1 bills.
Really? You got paid in cash?
Oh, they absolutely.
Wow.
It was very, very obvious that,
Wow.
I mean, it wouldn't surprise me that if they were paying zero taxes on any of this.
See, because now when I was reading through that Instagram account, I had a better idea why, because they got all these teachers to teach for no money or for little money. They, basically just the way that they were able to do it, maybe, I don't know, was just by exploiting everybody. It seems like. So let's go back. When did you start to go to Yoga to the People? Was that a place did you train there?
Yeah, actually, so this is part of my story with them is that I discovered yoga at Yoga to the People. So, it brought so much good to my life being able to have that physical practice. And I went there every day. And the reason I started yoga was because I actually lost my dream job. I had my dream job as a hockey writer. And I'm going.
Wait a second, a hockey writer, like the sport hockey?
Yep, the sport hockey. I would go to Madison Square Garden and interview the Rangers before they played the game that night or after they played the game. And it was I had my dream job because I loved hockey. But I was very junior there and didn't own up to some of the responsibilities. I didn't realize that they weren't quite asking me. So I lost that job, and to avoid depression, I started to go to Yoga to the People. And then I practiced every day I still practice every day, but just about. And what's it called? But I really got into yoga, and several years later, I think I did my first training in 2012. So there was 6 years where I was just practicing.
Mm-hmm. And what was the location that you were going to?
I started at St. Mark's, but then quickly after that, I very got into their Bikram program.
I see.
Which was, the same sequence as Bikram. And then they had that. And then, this is also another very interesting thing. They had that Bikram program. And then while I did my Bikram training with them, they said there was a lawsuit with Bikram and Yoga to the People. So they briefly stopped teaching that sequence right after our training. The last day of our training, they're surprise, learn this new sequence instead.
Yeah. And that did get resolved though, didn't it? You're allowed to teach the sequence, just not use the script, I think, whatever it was. Yeah.
Yeah. But the really interesting part of that to me was there's a picture of the owner of Yoga to the People at a Bikram training 1 or 2 years ago now. And it's why did Bikram sue this guy who he's now still friends with? And that seems so super shady to me.
Well, I know there was a moment where Bikram was trying to clamp down controls on his method or whatever. So he had legal teams that were sending out notices to all the Bikram schools or all the people who were teaching the sequence that they were aware of. He might have got caught up in that, but
it's so weird because they seemingly still have a good relationship.
Well, that's weird. That's even weirder that they would still have a good relationship. Although I guess not that weird given what we now know. All right, but okay, so you started practicing. You practiced there for 6 years before you did any training there. Did you have other teacher training, or was that the first place you did teacher training?
That was the first place I did the training, and I did 2 trainings in the first year I did my training. So I did a vinyasa training, and then I did the Bikram training because I was very into the Bikram yoga at the time.
Right.
So then I started teaching there for a while, and it was not much. It was 1 class a week, and I was still a very green teacher. Right. And probably not viewed as someone who is going to be work there that much, but I just kept at it and like kept showing up every day and kept showing up every day. And
They
also,
always need subs, right? They'll like, you were good to sub when they needed somebody.
Oh, and the other thing is that when you graduate from a teacher training at Yoga to the People, every student, to teach a class there to get paid, you have to do an internship. So you have to teach at least 20, and I think then they upped it to 25 classes for no pay.
You see, that's how you manage to have a yoga center by donation.
Exactly. It's a business model of exploitation.
Yes.
And then it wasn't just the vinyasa classes I had to do that with. I also had to do that when I did the Bikram training, or their, hot yoga training. I had to do that. I had to give them another 25 or 20 hot yoga classes for free as well. And then even when they opened a Yoga to the People too, I had to give them another like 10 free classes. Although the owner there was kind of nice, because each of the studios was owned by different people, even though it was under the Yoga to the People umbrella. And she was actually quite nice. And I taught like 1 or 2 free classes. And then the next week she was like, hey, your pay envelopes in the back room or whatever.
I see. Well, you had already given the 20 free classes. You shouldn't have had to give any more free.
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting. There were different owners.
Yeah. Well, there were owners of the different studios, but it was still very much under the Yoga to the People umbrella.
I see. Now, did you also teach at St. Mark's Place?
Yes. Yeah, I taught at St. Mark's Place,
And so did you, when you taught, was that one owned by the guy? What's his name? The dude?
Greg. Yeah.
Greg.
I think so. I mean,
because I remember, I thought he lived in that same building, and like he had one floor that he lived on and then one floor that was the studio. I don't know if that's right though. For some reason, I remember that in my mind.
From what I've heard, I've never went into his apartment, but I think he had an apartment like across the street or something.
Okay.
And I actually had kind of limited interaction with him, which I'm glad about now.
Mm-hmm.
But every teacher training I did there was, okay, now teach 25 free classes for us. And then once you're done teaching those classes, your classes would get drastically pulled back, at least for most people, unless they like really liked you for some reason. So you felt like you had to like constantly try to show them that you're worthy.
You see, I think that's the reason why I was interested to have this conversation with you. Honestly, I kind of questioned it because I thought, well, like there's no more to Yoga to the People, right? They're not still open, are they?
They aren't. The one on St. Mark's isn't, but there's some of their hot yoga studios, which have been rebranded Hot on Yoga, are trying to claim they're not associated with Yoga to the People, but they're owned by this guy who has nothing to do with yoga and is very close to the owner, Greg. So I would definitely be very wary of definitely never step foot in one of those Hot on Yoga studios. There's one on 27th Street, I believe. And then I think there's one in like Denver.
Huh.
Yeah.
Wow. See, I guess the reason why I was hesitant is I feel like right now, given everything that's going on, and I just like, do I want to be putting out stuff that happened in the past that makes people feel like shit? Is that helpful?
Right.
But at the same time, I feel like when I think of Yoga to the People and like, it was there was an image around it and it was like a cool place. And frankly, I did have Sam on years ago and he talked about how like the kind of great aspects of it. And I'm sure there were kind of great aspects of it.
Who'd you have on?
Sam Chase.
Oh, yeah, Sam. And there, that was like, to be honest, it was a shame it was corrupt from the top down, because there were so many really, really phenomenal yoga teachers that got developed there.
Right.
Like, I don't know if you know Talia.
Mm-hmm. I'm familiar. I don't know her, but I know who you're talking about. Yeah.
If you know who she is, she's like this giant yoga brand in her own right now. And she like started doing her training there. And there's just like some very like really good teachers who, if this organization had treated them well, it would have been like an amazing yoga studio with all sorts of teachers that branched out into all sorts of different ways. But then,
well, you see, that's the thing. I don't think it's an organization. I think it's like one guy, pretty much. Or, I guess it all comes from the top. And that's sort of the issue, is that I guess that's why I thought maybe we should have a conversation, because now that people are eventually going to start to reopen or go back to in-person teaching again, people should be aware that sometimes that glamorous scene that we thought of as like, oh, successful yoga world, yoga to the people, many locations, wow, cool scene, had a kind of an underbelly to it.
Oh yeah, very much.
And my feeling is, I always want there to be like an accurate history of things, so that when we go to open centers, we're smarter and we don't fall victim to the same stuff, and maybe we don't perpetuate the same kind of stuff.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I think it was just the way they operated was very manipulative of their teachers.
Well, let's go through that, because one of the things that was shocking to me, because there was also kind of a pretty mainstream article written about it. Maybe it was like The Atlantic or something. There was like a pretty high profile media outlet that wrote about it. And they talked about it in that. And I've heard other people talk about it in terms of like during the trainings, there would be like these share circles where you were expected to kind of like reveal secrets and vulnerables, things about yourself, and cry and stuff. And if you didn't, you kind of got like talked down to like you're not doing the work. Did that happen in the trainings that you were in?
Yeah. So every training I did there, they had this exercise called they did a dynamic meditation, and they brought in a couple of Osho teachers, and we did a sort of dynamic meditation.
Wait a second, did you say they brought in Osho teachers?
Yeah, they brought in teachers from the Osho lineage.
Okay, because that's the other guy who the big documentary was about, right?
I think so. I'm not familiar with it.
That they brought in Osho teachers is very telling.
Yeah. Now that I look back on it, I agree. And I never really looked into the Osho lineage before, and I still don't know too much about it, but I've definitely heard that he was accused of,
all kinds of stuff. But that's crazy. That he was one of the things he was accused of is these very manipulation techniques. So describe what is this thing that you were talking about, what does a dynamic meditation look like, and then what happens after the dynamic meditation?
Okay, so the dynamic meditation was like a lot of jumping around and like a lot of breathing exercises and this like jumping around technique that sort of seemed to, now that I'm like a bit more of a educated yoga teacher, I think, after, some more trainings with, I trained with Dharma and Jared McCann at Lighthouse Yoga, which unfortunately now closed. But looking back on those techniques, they seem to like initiate like a more sympathetic nervous system.
If you are hearing this message, then you're listening to the free version of J. Brown Yoga Talks. To hear the rest of our conversation, please subscribe to Podcast Premium at jbrownyoga.com/premium.